Benvenute a tutte e a tutti. It's a pleasure. You have a simultaneous translation, as you can see. Oh, there is a QR code if you want to get simultaneous translation with artificial intelligence, of course. No translators are around. And I would like to have something translating me from the Venetian dialect into Italian, because each time I come to Venice, I try to understand what they tell each other, people, and that will come too, probably. So thank you so much. We have this conference hosted and co-organized with the GENS Public Programme of la Biennale Architettura 2025. The Biennale is chaired this year by Carlo Ratti, who is a fellow of Aspen Institute Italia. We thank him enormously for this opportunity. And the conference is on the energy of artificial intelligence. Of course, it's a title which means what artificial intelligence can do and how much energy we need for artificial intelligence. The issue of how much energy is needed for artificial intelligence is on newspaper all days. I remember that just a few days ago, Amazon or Google decided to buy 4 new nuclear plants or builds. And so it's so hungry, the artificial intelligence, or is so hungry today because it's not yet fully developed. And so in the future, probably, we can have good results with less energy. The risk, of course, is overinvestment in energy, then you will not need it anymore. But I have no solutions about that, but I can tell you we have a lot of people who are extremely good on these issues. And I stop here. We shall have a panel, and then we can take for each panel 2 or 3 questions, no more. And then the panelists will answer the specific questions. So the chairs is by Luca De Biase, who is a columnist of Il Sole 24 Ore, the main Italian financial newspaper, one of the main financial economic newspapers in Europe, and Marta Dassù. She's senior advisor for European Affairs, Aspen Institute Italia, editor of Aspenia, and a column of Aspen Italia. So you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Angelo. Thank you, Marta, for organizing and inviting me to work for this panel. Start with the first panel, and then Marta will chair and lead the second. This first panel is about energy and AI. Of course, it is not just the technical fact. It's a socio-technical fact. And we come from the Biennale, where we saw that it is a bio-socio-technical affair. Collective, artificial, and natural intelligence are involved. And that was fascinating to do with Carlo Ratti, who directed the new Biennale this year. So, artificial intelligence is not just one thing. There are many artificial intelligence, many different models. Energy is not the same thing. It's what kind of source of energy you use, what kind of distribution system. And of course, that is linked to a sort of geopolitical problem. Where is energy? Where is it concentrated? Where is it concentrated? Artificial intelligence. We are going to have these consequences of artificial intelligence that are linked to this kind of limits, to this kind of constraints, to these directions. Is it a very polarized industry, or is it going to be distributed? What's the role of Europe in the polarized world of US and China and India and the rest? So these are questions that we are trying to solve, or at least address, in this first panel. And we start, as you see, it's also a matter of distance and time zone. We start with Edward Luttwak, who is a strategic advisor of the US Department of Defense. AI is, of course, very much about defense. For Europe, this is a moment in which we need to understand this fact, because we are deciding for the next decade what we do with AI, defense, and energy. So 7 minutes is the limit. If you can, Edward, the floor is yours. The floor would be yours if you were there.
Well, I can see you. Can you see me?
Oh, ecco. Yeah.
Yeah, you can. Okay.
Thank
Do
you.
you want me to speak in Italian or English?
We're doing this in English.
Very good. Okay, so everybody has been thinking about this, seriously, and there are some extremely interim conclusions. These are not solid conclusions because there's a big unknown. So, subject to the big unknown, uh, conclusion number one, anybody in the world who wants to take advantage of artificial intelligence obviously needs people who are educated enough to be able to apply these techniques in different ways. And so you have a list of countries, and the list of countries that are players, global players, will go down in number because not all of them can adapt to this. Second requirement, focusing on energy, is the availability of energy in a flexible way. If you have a highly centralized energy system, it's possible to do it, but then you require high-level policy coordination. In the case of the United States, energy industry is decentralized. There are, a couple of thousand oil companies. There are um, hundreds of different electricity producers. So it is a flexible system that should, in principle, be able to adjust, subject to things like environmental controls and restrictions. Again, in the case of the United States, they vary state by state. If they don't let you put your system in California, you put it next door in New Mexico, etc. However, there's a question of supply, a question of supply. And in the United States at the present moment, the focus is on the so-called wind corridor. Wind corridor. Wind is not fashionable with the Trump administration, but wind is fashionable with people who want economical energy. And in Texas, from Texas to the north to Canada, there is a wind corridor where you can generate with wind because you also have natural gas. You put up wind, the moment wind stops, switches on natural gas. If you have a wind natural gas system, then you're able to provide continuity of supply. Texas had a huge breakdown 10 years ago, so they learned how to do this. And so energy supply is will be forthcoming, although people in the AI industry are beginning to invest in small nuclear power stations. These nuclear power stations, which are being offered by there are already different companies trying to come up with the small nuclear power station, which is dedicated to providing power for an AI system. But anybody who now puts up an AI system with nuclear power as an intention also will have connection to the local grid, etc. So there is a whole energy security issue. It's called in a business, I hear it's called continuity, uh, which implies automatically that you have two different energy supply has to be two different systems. That is not two electrical companies, but gas, let's say nuclear and gas, nuclear and wind, and so on. So flexibility in this, licensing speed. For example, the state of New York takes 19 years to license even a windmill in your AI any more than they have natural gas. They don't have natural gas, they won't give licenses. So there's going to be once again a shakeout, which is where you have rigid government systems is not going to work. Where you have flexible government systems, you will have AI. If you have rigidity, you don't have AI. In the case of India, for example, the big question is whether they will finally allow the development of the Bhutan hydropower, which has been held up by local interests for 30 years. If they allow it, then Bhutan will be a place where they can do it. So these are simple things, although there's the big unknown, of which I know nothing, but your future, a speaker who will follow me, apparently is very well informed, and it is a fundamental question whether it is possible to operate AI in a different way that simply uses much less energy. I heard that suggested, but I know nothing more, but your other speaker will tell you on that issue. Then there is a question which is very important in my view, which is, as I say, that you cannot really have successful AI without a competitive energy market. If you cannot plug in to different suppliers who have different rates and use different methodologies, different methods to produce electricity, it's going to be very difficult to apply AI because discontinuity, interruption, is simply not an acceptable risk. You have to have continuity. Continuity means multiple suppliers using multiple methodologies. So countries that have a centralized system will have serious difficulties with that because of interruption. So as I say, there is the unknown of how much energy you will actually need for the computations, on which I cannot speak, but your next speaker or the speaker afterwards will speak. Then there is the question of application. And one example is insurance companies. Insurance companies are large-scale employers of white-collar employees, of people who have some level of education. Many of them have university degrees or things like that, and they are at this moment, they are the place where AI is coming in. And what happens is, for example, a normal insurance company will have a lot of people who deal with customers. You know, you have the car accidents and you call up somebody and that somebody says, well, we'll pay for this, we won't pay for that. I will call the garage, I'll make arrangements, etc., etc. These people are being fired in very large numbers. So they're just being fired because in reality, when you call this person who answers the phone and says, my name is Michael, my name is Joseph, actually, they're not allowed to make their own decisions. They have standard criteria which they apply. If you don't accept the standard criteria, then it moves over to the legal department. But the people who are mostly employed by insurance companies today are the customer-facing people. And the customer-facing people used to be independent. A long time ago, they would listen on the phone and make a judgment and say, okay, we'll pay for this, we won't pay for that. Now they have to follow, for many years now, they have to follow fixed criteria. Because they follow fixed criteria, they actually don't make the decision. And these people are being fired in huge numbers. And they are being replaced by AI. One of the so-called, language models, ChatGPT, or all the others coming out. Now, if you own an insurance company or you manage an insurance company, more practically, if you cannot fire hundreds of people, because of restrictions, labor restrictions, rules, necessity to negotiate, and all that stuff. If you cannot fire them, you cannot install artificial intelligence. You just can't. It's the same way in 1830 when the first looms came into action. Instead of handwork and you had the machine work, if you cannot fire the workers, you cannot buy the machines. So I will see worldwide countries that have rigid employment laws, that have rigidity in that regard, and makes it difficult to fire people or makes it slow or makes it too expensive to fire people, they will fall behind in artificial intelligence. So on the one hand, there has to be energy supply subject to this unknown, or whether, in other words, it's possible to reduce the requirement that we don't know. And to have energy supply, you need a flexible energy industry. It's very, very difficult for countries that have a single electrical supplier or a single supply of electricity to adjust, because these single country electrical systems are, part of the overall political system, their government system. They're not going to be able to adjust very quickly. And then there's a question of labor laws. If you have countries where you cannot just fire people, say goodbye, this is your payment, you haven't lost your pension rights, but you have to clear out of the office tomorrow. Leave. If you cannot do that, you can't apply artificial intelligence because you cannot pay for both. You cannot
Edward,
pay both, Okay,
yeah.
so we have, in other words, AI is going to be different for every country where it arrives because every country will have a different set of structural factors. Then there is the biggest
Edward,
thing
I'm
of
I'm
all,
not
which is
firing
training.
you, but I'm not firing you, but I would like you to conclude in half a minute.
Good. I'll conclude by half a minute. Educational systems must also have flexibility. If you don't have a flexible educational system and you can't have the rapid replacement of teaching of this subject and that subject and this course and that course to teach AI, which is an activity which has just started, by the way, as a pedagogic methodology, has only, in my view, available in about 4 countries at this moment that have AI pedagogy. If you don't do that, you will fall behind. So, in other words, AI is the same as any other macro technological innovation, which is it doesn't depend on the innovation. You can't just pick up the phone and buy the innovation. You have to adjust society for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So the strategic idea that you gave us is that systems with flexibility are on the basis of power generation or education or even labor market will apply AI better than others, which is surely an indication that we go with. And now I would like to give the floor to Martin Sandbu. Again, a very general and strategic vision he will bring to us. He just came out with a book that is called Economics of Belonging, which is mainly about the changes, the strategic changes that happen in the West from the liberal order to what's next. And so in this big transformation, what's the role of AI, energy production, geopolitical relationships, and your thought, Martin?
Thank you very much for having me. I trust you can hear me. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I'm also sorry that I don't feel I can give you expert opinion like Edward and others, but what journalists are good at is to ask the right questions. And I think there are some extremely important questions and challenges we're not asking enough in this area. So I will try to bring some of them to the fore. I mean, by way of setting the scene, I will talk about this from a European perspective, because in Europe we have this particular double problem that we are behind on digital tech generally. And this has been set out in the Draghi report and other documents. This is now sort of well understood. We're also disadvantaged in terms of energy. It's an energy poor, or rather a fuel poor continent, and we have higher energy prices, electricity prices, and other energy prices than in the rest of the world. That is something that's recognized as a problem for industry and the economy generally, but of course it will affect something like AI particularly. So Europe uniquely has these double problems that are in themselves unrelated, uh, being behind on some of the digital revolution and having particularly high energy prices. But that means that we need to pay particular attention to how those two come together in the European context. A second preliminary, and this I think Edward was referring to before, I think it's important to recognize that we don't actually know how much energy the AI revolution will require. Very probably it will require a lot of energy. And, you have seen the numbers that these data centers are enormously power hungry. But I'll just point out some reasons to think that we may be surprised. So one reason is DeepSeek, that show that we may suddenly be surprised by alternative methods in the technology itself. And some alternative methods may be computationally lighter or simpler, and that in turn may mean for less energy use. Who knows what quantum computing, when it really takes off, will do to AI's energy needs. Again, I am no expert. I can predict that it will change things a lot. Whether it will make the energy requirements smaller, I don't know. I'm just saying we don't know. But fortunately, especially from a European perspective, it doesn't matter all that much from a policy perspective. We are wise to act as if the energy needs will be high, very high, because that's the problem we already face and already have to solve in Europe. So, we'll just go with that. But I think it's worth just having it in the back of our minds how little we really know. But going forward on the basis that the power needs will be extreme, I'll just share some of the numbers. You've seen similar numbers yourselves. We know that OpenAI alone is talking about building data centers that will require power capacity, electricity capacity of something like 20 gigawatts. That's close to 2% of the US total installed capacity of electricity. And the EU's is similar. So a single company is planning to add 1 or 2% of the total supply we have. And of course, there are many companies doing this, and Europe is still nowhere near close to the front of the race. So these are big numbers. Goldman Sachs has had a report earlier this year predicting that energy need for data centers will increase by 165% between 2023 and the end of the decade. So again, that amounts to, in total, maybe nearly 100 gigawatts of additional installed capacity. And we already don't have enough, right? So it's a huge problem. But the problem that, and then, so we know that we need more energy, and we know some of the problems there. We don't have a joined up policy in Europe on electricity. This is still very much done at the national level, and the result is that we have inefficient grid interconnections across Europe. It means that we have too large differences between countries in terms of their electricity supply and prices, and it means that we have inefficient policy making because the decisions are taken at levels that don't take into account the entire continental priorities. So we have work to do there. We also don't have an adequate European-wide policy on AI. But at least there is a consciousness now, I think, that we need one. And if there's any doubt that we need a policy to promote the development of cutting-edge digital technology, including AI, in Europe for Europe, I'll refer you to a piece I had out on the FT website just this morning, a couple of hours ago, about the threats to Europe if we don't. I will not go into that here. You can see the piece, but I see 4 threats and they all start with an S. So I'll just list them so you can remember them. They are surplus extraction or rent extraction. They are surveillance. They are sabotage. And they are soft power dependence. And those apply to digital services in general. We've seen it in social media. We've seen it in dependence on cloud services and so on. It also applies in AI. I'll mention particularly the soft power bit because Edward touched on something similar. AI, like some of these other digital services, seem to affect the way we actually develop cognitively and how the young learn to think. And so to the extent that AI is trained mostly in the US with US sensibilities based on data selected by US executives, I think is a soft power problem for Europe. Now, we need an adequate policy for energy. We need an adequate policy for AI. What about this intersection? I see a worry here that the fact that we realize we need adequate, better policies on both of these separate, in both of these separate fields, could make us stumble and make mistakes in the interaction. And what I have in mind is this. If we think that we need more AI development, either training or at least processing in Europe, in European servers, European data centers, that sort of obviously gives us a reason to promote data center building in Europe, right? So we will be led towards policies that encourage that, or maybe subsidize that, or prioritize it over other competing uses or demands for energy. But the risk here, of course, is that we're so keen on directing energy towards growing data centers that we forget to think about what the data centers are used for. And I think there is a real risk that we end up with policies that prioritize, in particular, US makers of AI to process on European soil, but processing for their own models, maybe not even training, but that we end up essentially putting in place policies and subsidies to provide cheap energy to US providers of AI services. And that seems to be to shoot ourselves in the foot in 2 ways. Both because we will allocate already scarce energy to an industry that's based elsewhere or controlled from elsewhere. So we'll harm other industries, and we will subsidize US AI over European-grown AI. Now, there's no necessity in this happening. But it seems to me that we don't currently have a very good policy framework, even at national level, but certainly not at European level, that allows us to sit back and take all of this into a coherent strategy, saying, okay, we want a homegrown AI industry. We want AI services that are based on models that are trained by Europeans in Europe. We probably want a lot of them to be processed in server farms that are in Europe so that in the case of some conflict, nobody can sabotage it from the outside. But we don't really have the tools to say, well, what does that mean in terms of the on-the-ground decisions about which grid connections do we prioritize? There are long queues for connecting up to power grids in most European countries at the moment. And data centers are only one of many people demanding, but maybe one of the biggest demanders of new power connections. I don't think that either at national, but certainly not at European level, that we have the tools or even the kind of policy-making headspace to sit and think, well, do we really want, or to what extent do we want new grid connections that are scarce and expensive to prioritize, for example, US AI companies that want to build data centers here? And what are the tools, and what again is the policy-making headspace to sit down and think, well, actually, maybe we should reserve some grid connections for European AI providers, even if they don't pay as much, for example. The system we have is largely based on the sort of letting market forces do their thing from the 1990s. One reason why, well, here are a couple of reasons why that is risky at the moment. One is the obvious geopolitical strategic dimensions to market outcomes that we all know about. Another is that if there is rent extraction happening in the digital economy, and I, for one, am convinced there is a lot, that's why surplus extraction was one of my 4 S's, then markets have failures, right? If you let the highest bidder get the grid connection, it will be the one who's best placed to place the rent because they can pay the most upfront, because they know they can capture the rent and they'll have enough left over. So I will finish there on this warning that while we need, and we know we need, better policies to grow the electricity capacity generation capacity, and we need more adequate policy to promote AI at home, we are not thinking enough about the interaction between those two, and on the current system, we are likely to make decisions that are counterproductive in terms of the priorities of those two policy areas. So that's my warning. I will finish there. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martin. Both of you told us that we are not able to forecast which kind of outcome will be the real outcome in terms of AI consuming power or energy. Maybe the next, you said the next models will be made in a way that they need less energy. And maybe this is linked to the real European strategy in which we will develop our own models that are made in a way that don't need that much power. We're talking about edge AI, we're talking about different sorts of models and architectures. We'll see what happens in the next contributions from our panelists. We miss some of them that were announced, but we still have very important contributions, starting with Monica Beltrametti, member of the board of Attract European Commission, to start addressing the problem of how we make this energy.
Thank you. I'd like to step back for a second and give a broader context to the discussion, summarizing a little bit what I heard so far. So AI is expanding every domain, from large language models to healthcare, aerospace, robotic, defense, climate modeling, and many, many more. So we're not talking just about large language models, but about all these applications that use AI and use a lot of computing power. As a consequence of this expansion, we are witnessing the creation of a new infrastructure built on 3 systems that are totally interdependent with each other. First, the computing power where AI models are trained and deployed. Second, the electrical power, the desirable clean energy that keeps data centers running, but that we also need to meet climate goals. Third, the distribution grid, which we just heard about, the network that connects sources of clean energy to where the energy is actually consumed. Each system requires different policies, regulations, and investments, but only working together, the systems define how competitive and sustainable industries will be in the future and whether we meet climate goals. Now, with respect to computing power, it demands careful planning between government and industry because data centers have become a new critical national infrastructure. People like to compare it with the development of national railroads in the 19th century. Large companies have their own AI data centers, but not every company can afford this. And you don't want to run, for example, your defense application on a foreign cloud computing service where you don't even know whether the data center is. Therefore, governments are developing shared centers, data centers, and we also see the development of privately owned data centers, many created by private-public consortia. Italy and other countries must do the same, and I don't see in Italy, for example, much activity about this. Otherwise, we'll be left behind. As electrical power is concerned, it has been clear since many years, actually many years, that only nuclear power can satisfy AI's electricity demands. And this has led to a real burst of multi-billion-dollar investments between AI companies and the nuclear energy sector. The investments come in clusters, and the slide shows, if I manage to do this, shows two representative examples of such clusters. You can read the numbers by yourself, but the point here that the AI companies have invested heavily in small modular reactors, we heard to speak about it, being the new generation of smaller, safer, scalable nuclear fission reactors. They also invested very heavily in nuclear fusion, which is definitely the future for clean energy production, because unlike fission, it does not require enriched uranium, which produces radioactive waste, and whose supply has geopolitical issues. You see that, in fact, Eni is well positioned here, having bought NVIDIA computer chips and building one of the fastest computers in the world, and they also have invested in fusion. However, the problem is timing. SMRs will become deployable only starting from 2030, while fusion reactors are expected to work by 2030 and then really scale up in the 40s. Needs to gain quick access to advancing EU's climate and competitiveness goals. For a country like Italy, there are two issues at play. First, when, but also how to regulate nuclear reactors. And secondly, whether to develop or buy them. And a mixed approach seems to be wise. With respect to nuclear power regulations, the government has just introduced a draft bill empowering the government to regulate the introduction of fission and fusion reactors. I don't know how many people know that. However, in the meantime, the European SMR Alliance is discussing how to simplify regulations for SMRs, which are safer than traditional power plants so that they can be deployed faster, which is very important. The US has already done it. Trump signed a decree declaring AI data centers fueled by SMRs as critical defense facilities. You must have read about it, and has asked to lower the constraints of their regulation. For fusion, the current suggestion is to add regulatory functions to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna and use it to regulate fusion internationally. A country like Italy needs to participate in these discussions and needs to determine who participates, because it's not always very clear, and needs to support these international decisions. All these activities need, however, to be coordinated if we want to move forward fast. This brings me to the transmission grids. Transmission grids worldwide can't keep up with the rising electricity demands. we need systems that can not only distribute the additional power, but also balance demand and supply in real time and in a fair way, not how it was described before. Now, Terna, the Italian transmission system operator, has a 23 billion euro, a big number, modernization plan that follows the National Energy and Climate Plan. It projects new connections to renewables, solar and wind, to the grid of 94 gigawatts by 2035. But the plan needs to be extended fast to include the upcoming connections to SMRs and then fusion reactors to avoid the grid to become a bottleneck. So I'd like to conclude with a remark that there is the feasible and desirable goal to achieve the construction of first commercial SMR units, domestic or foreign supplied, by 2030-33. And then scale them up, including fusion reactors in the 40s, with nuclear providing from 11 to 20% of electricity by 2050. This is an ENEA estimate. To reach this goal, however, there needs to be a focused approach with key stakeholders that are accountable and well coordinated. And this led me think about Venice. Why Venice? Well, the Venetian Republic was superb in managing resources like wood, timber supply being crucial for Venice to build ships for trade and defense, and hence for Venice naval supremacy that lasted centuries and centuries. Venice managed resources through entities called magistrati. They were responsible for the policies, regulations, logistics, and deployment of resources. To handle electricity and its distribution, the Venetians would have created a magistrato all'energia, I'm sure. Perhaps we should learn from them and create a Ministero dell'Energia. And to start with, a dedicated national authority that explicitly governs computing power as a critical national infrastructure. This would likely help focusing all the stakeholders and crucial decisions that have been taken to realizing the climate and competitiveness goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This, well, the wisdom in the Venetian Republic is always welcome in Venice. And so we'll think about this ministry. But what's important is that you are talking about a system in which nuclear is going to be very important for answering the question. I guess Lapo Pistelli has some ideas about this too. He is Public Affairs Director at ENI.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me. So I would like to focus on two different issues in my contribution. First one about energy and AI, and a second major comment about I would say the geopolitics of all this and the implication of that. So on Sunday, there will be the new edition of ADIPEC, which is, together with CERAWeek, one of the two biggest energy exhibition worldwide. 2 years ago, during ADIPEC, no one was talking about AI. We were still focused in the conversation about getting the net zero by 2050, talking about new sources and new vectors like green hydrogen instead of CCUS. There was no AI even in a side event of a 5 days program. Last year, AI came on stage. I wouldn't say the elephant in the room, but the dinosaur in the room, the T-Rex in the room. All the hyperscalers were there. And so now we are, it's 1 year or so that we are discussing about how to rephrase, reset all the traditional scenarios we had in mind, because it's not anymore about the trilemma, so sustainability, the energy security, and the affordability of the energy security, but it's about the disruption of the equation. So it's about the hunger of power of these new systems, so the T-Rex. I won't give you numbers. I'm following Martin's assessment. We have so many numbers and no one of them is real. What we know is that how much? A lot. For sure, a lot. We have, something which already happened. In Ireland, energy consumption of data center overcame the domestic consumption of the households. It happened already. And we are saying different numbers that every year from now to 2030, we are going to add every year the total consumption like Germany or like Japan. Pick up and choose the country you prefer, but just to say that there will be a lot of new energy required. So the trend is there. It's very bold, it's very consistent. It's totally unuseful now to say it is about 100 gigawatt or terawatt or whatever. We know that we need a lot. How can we make this a new energy? I think that this is affecting severely the energy mix that we know, because, I love renewable power, but this kind of system cannot rely on batteries or solar and wind. So it's about programmable and steady power supply. That implies the resurrection of nuclear in all terms, traditional, SMR, fusion, but we know that the country who have not nuclear power in the energy mix will need a lot of time to get there. I think that at the end of the day, we will have to go back to blue power, that means gas with carbon capture, because it answers to the question of being a stable power supply. And I think that from this point of view, you see why IEA, Shell, and many other energy think tank and energy agencies are rephrasing their scenario from now to 2050. We have to say, but this is just a small bracket of any advertising, but we are working on all of the segments of this discussion, because we are working on fusion, as was mentioned before, in Boston with MIT at CFS. We are working in batteries for storage. We are working on high computing. Our HPC6 is working on a 600 petaflops computing capacity. We are working on quantum a lot, either on the hardware and on the software. And we can tell you that this is real. For sure, quantum will be, at the end of the day, less energy demanding than traditional high computing system. We know for certain. But, quantum is not for tomorrow. It's not for tomorrow. And we are also working a lot on proprietary algorithm for training the AI. The second part of the equation is about the promises of the AI vis-a-vis energy, because we know for sure today that there's a big need for power supply, but we know also, and we have to remember that AI can be a very powerful tool for getting higher efficiency in managing the whole system. Just to give you some items: management of storage, of trading, of pricing, of managing the grid, better weather forecast for producing renewables, better modeling of traditional oil and gas reservoirs. AI can give a real contribution. We don't know how this is going to rebalance the equation, but we know also that there's this other side of the equation. A lot of new energy, but also a lot of new promises about how to make this energy being more efficient. And then, as you know, the generative AI models can also help us in predicting scenarios in terms of energy consumption. And also in terms of, this is real in the energy space, for projecting new materials which can be helpful for replacing some of the critical minerals and rare earth which are actually needed to set up the infrastructure for this new energy space. The second comment, briefly, but I mean, I would like not to, resign from a geopolitical space. I will raise the question. I don't have the answer, but I know that this question is an existential one, because you can change the wording, but I could quote Brookings Institutions or Vladimir Putin or the Chinese strategy that in different words said exactly the same thing. Who's going to lead the AI by 2030 will run the world. That's it. Elon Musk, which is more, I would say, sulfuric guy in terms of character, said in 2019, I know for sure that the most plausible cause for the Third World War will be AI. I don't want to be apocalyptic, but it's quite clear that we know in the history of mankind that having or not having a technology can be a good reason for the rise and fall of powers, imperial powers and powers. And I think that we all agree that this kind of technology is not a normal technology. I don't know if this definition already exists, but I like to label it as a total technology. Why is it total technology? Because it gives you access to economic development, to the way you change the way to produce in economy, but it's a perfect tool for the total and absolute social control. We know the social scoring model from China, but just not being a Chinese citizen, it happened to me to travel taking a train from Beijing to Shanghai, and I didn't have any kind of ticket. Not because I have a ticket in my iPhone, but to the train from my biometric knowledge from the system. So it's already happening, it's there. But we know also that tracking an enemy and killing is something that can happen automatically. So this is a total control. So in this total control, as a citizen of this planet, I would like to be part of it in a discussion of a sort of, I would say, a global governance model, because this is what we need. Because actually, what you have is an absolute divergency among the Chinese system, which is state-driven, which is aimed at ensuring a leadership by 2030. It's about social control. It's about no control and no limit about privacy and data, because the social scoring is about rewarding you depending on whom you date with, or the kind of book you read, or the kind of comment you post, and so on and so forth. We know that actually US is leading in terms of technology, and because of the Silicon Valley, because there's no competition clause and in the contract in Silicon Valley, so the talents can migrate very easily from one company to another, because there's a phenomenal financial ecosystem. 3 years ago, we were talking about the unicorn by 3 billion market cap, and just yesterday, NVIDIA was over 5 million market cap. 5 trillion, sorry, market cap. Sorry, it's a difference. I think that in terms of EU, I would like to be very frank with you. It's very common to make fun about Europe. We are the one who don't innovate, we don't replicate, we just regulate. Okay, I do think that the AI Act was fundamental, if you believe in some European values. So because we care about privacy, we care about data, because we are data. I think that assessing the risk and saying what is minimum, limited, unacceptable, high, was a good beginning. And I would like to highlight that, as was said just a few minutes before, now there's a new phase where EU is boosting the rise of 4, 5, 6, we will see, big European champion, which will not be the background of a US hyperscaler playing here. It's also about sovereign technology, proprietary algorithm, proprietary energy. I mean, we're also involved in that. But what I would like to see in this debate is not losing sight of the existential question, which is the kind of governance of this new system, because You can't stop the wind with your hands, and this is a new wind, but it is a total technology control.
You with
I'm
my
stopping
hands.
here. Thank you.
And thank you very much. It's of course this is a set of questions also for the rest of the panel. But one unknown that we dealt with was what is really going to be needed by AI in terms of energy and how energy will be distributed or how AI will be distributed. Is there a model that can help us in terms of innovation in the system of AI? And we have Carlo Reita, who is CEO of Fondazione Chips IT, that can help.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll try to give you some of the elements why the energy is so important in AI. So I cannot forecast where the energy will be, but at least give you what are the driving forces and what are the elements in there. I just wanted to show you this one because energy consumption and the hardware is something that's been there since the beginning. This is the first probably AI machine in '57. This was able to recognize circles and squares in an A4 piece of paper and was totally analog and had motors changing the values of resistance like you change the volume on the old radios. This was consuming something like 100 kilowatts. So the problem has been there since the beginning, and only some kind of collective blindness those of us that were not involved in the developments forgot that behind the digitalization there is real hardware and there is real physical world. Another element I wanted to stress is that has been mentioned already, but if you look at the different type of AIs, you have a large panel of applications, a large panel of machines, a large panels of algorithms, and it's very important to see both the evolution and both what is the objective. There are not just the objective of the generative AIs, there are others we will touch upon later. But if you look at what is the power consumption and what is the peak performance of system, you see that there is an entire spectrum there. And at the moment, generative AI is only part of this. There is a lot of other things going on there. Other element for thought is that if we start on the fundamental reason why the AI system consume energy is because you need energy for the calculation. But most of everything in an electronic system, what consumes energy is shifting data around. If you have the data within the chip, you have a very small amount of energy. If the data is just the chips next to it, where the memory is based, you need a lot more chips, some numbers there. You see that you go orders of magnitudes of energy just to difference, just to show, to shuffle the data around in the electronic system. So more data you shift around, the more the system is separated, the more you consume. And that is one axis of research today is how to better mix the computation function and the memory function to reduce this. That actually today is 90% of the consumption within the chip. Now, the other point is that, the other point for the consumption, I'll come later to this one, but the other point for consumption is the more you consume in the chip, considering that the chips need to work at a fixed temperature, the more energy you need to take out, the more you need to cool it down. So you consume even more energy. So you have what you dissipate there, what you dissipate in your power supply, you are converting from the grid down to systems that today are operating at fractions of a volt and that operating at thousands of amperes. So the conversion process from the grid to what goes into the chips also has some efficiency. And that is, I would say, you see it in your laptops. Things about 10 years ago, the dimension of your supply and things today. So a lot of energy can be saved in that, and a lot of energy can be saved in keeping it down. So the less you consume inside, the less the system will consume overall. The other element I'm showing here is that a lot of the benefits of reducing consumption are already being used up. If you compare going from GPT-1 to GPT-5, actually there has been a major reduction in single operation. But as you are doing more and more operation, the overall power dissipation keeps staying the same. But we already have used a lot of leverage. This is not exactly power consumption, that is on the carbon optimization, but you will see that we already had orders of magnitude gains moving to less precision representation of numbers, better algorithms, better technology. So we already have used up something in just in the last 7-8 years, a factor 1,000 of efficiency. So finding a lot more efficiency there is becoming increasingly difficult. Now, getting back to something that was already mentioned in the panel is that today everything is, all these systems are in the cloud. All these systems are produced with chips that are designed and fabricated outside Europe. Supplier of high-performance computers or a data center. So that battle is already very difficult to win and needs to, I think, legislation control is where we to play. But that is not entirely sustainable, in my opinion, for various reasons. If we want to deploy the capability of AI towards really cyber-physical system where the AI really interacts with this physical environment, you need to make it a lot more distributed. You need to improve on the telecommunication. Just the fact that if you need real-time control, the system cannot be very far, the computing system cannot be very far from the real object, because just the transmission of the data will take the time. So we have to fight the battle that is going on for the generative AI, but that should not let us forget that there is still battle coming on, there is still evolution, where in that case, instead, Europe can still play a role. And that is my major message, is that it's not one versus others, and everything needs to be done, but let's not forget the evolution and where things will probably evolve, and where we can still play a basic role, because it's, in a sense, it's still very very much closer to our needs and our capabilities. Last, I would say, is the getting all these systems back to where intelligence starts, in the brain, in a sense. And so how to make use of concept that comes from biology in order to improve systems, especially the system we were talking about, this cyber-physical systems that need to operate autonomously with extremely low energy. That is a field that is still going on, and I think for robotics, for autonomous systems, for machines and so on, this is something we can still have a hope to take a leading part. Hoping that we don't do like the last time where we were the leaders. Don't forget that the Nobel Prize is gone for AI, where one French and one British, but they are both working in the US now. So we are not behind in research, it's the transfer to industry that is always lacking. But I would say this is still, I would say, an important part that I would like to see, because in this one we still have something to say.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yes, well, the breakthroughs can happen, and a breakthrough, for example, is a new kind of architecture in which AI is distributed, is on the edge or something like that, is on the IoT the idea, on the object that is intelligent, use as the big data center. This is an idea that also is linked to a possibility, to an opportunity for Europe to play a role in a different game, not the game of data centers and centralized AI, but in a decentralized AI. Well, that's an interesting point that gives us more deep analysis on what we are talking about. And let's go ahead with the geopolitical and Euro system consequences with Oksana Antonenko. Please.
Inviting me, a really interesting discussion in this context also of seeing the Biennale, and actually after seeing the exhibition just a few hours ago, I left with quite a positive feeling, you know, even though our discussion here, of course, is very, it tends to be focused on risks, and I'm afraid I'm also going to speak mostly about risks. But I think going to something like Biennale and seeing the power of AI potentially in bringing communities together and existing in harmony, I think, with humanity is really also should be appreciated. So a lot of what I was planning to say was said by Lapo, so I'm going to be very brief. You know, I'll try to be much shorter than 7 minutes, because I'm just going to build on what he said about the geopolitical context in which AI is evolving. The first point to make, of course, we all know that we are living at a time when geopolitics are becoming increasingly confrontational. And we are seeing transition from the kind of post-Cold War era, when there was an expectation that the world will be, or at least a big part of this world, towards a new reality in which rapidly escalating tensions and confrontation among major powers. Many of them are just aspiring powers, others are already well-established powers. And I think if we combine that process, and we know that this transition from the post-Cold War system to some sort of new equilibrium in the geopolitical sphere is going to take many years to come. So in this transition phase, I think it is interesting to combine it with this technological transition, because we do not really remember when was the last time when a major technological revolution, this kind of holistic technology, as Lapo said, that AI is, which basically amplifies the power of a country in absolutely every sphere, from military to education to social to economic growth, when it actually happened in a contentious geopolitics. I think we really are talking about the 19th century or prior to that. And certainly the last major industrial kind of breakthrough and revolution, such as transition to digital economy, happened in the environment of this aspiration for the rules-based order, and certainly somewhere where the West was playing the leading role. So my thesis here, I suppose, is very much similar to what Lapo was saying, that we are likely to see this transition to AI, as well as, of course, continuing competition over the resource economy, which we have not yet abandoned. And I think when we talk about, be it access to traditional sources of energy that are still going to be important, and perhaps as International Energy Agency and OPEC are now reassessing the demand projections in the future, we certainly are going to see, many major powers, and we're seeing that already, of course, in the United States, where, Trump is talking about drill, baby, drill, but also in China, where I see this kind of merger between China and Russia and closer alignment, very much underpinned by the assumption that the access to traditional energy sources is going to remain important, and perhaps more important as we go towards this, accelerated AI revolution. The second point is other, of course, resources that are important. We all know about the bottlenecks and supply chain of the critical, minerals that are now already being very much, guided by this, competition over technologies which are critically important for success and speed of transition in this race for for AI, but also when we talk, for example, about the nuclear power, I think it is time to think how these supply chains are going to work in this, modular nuclear reactors. We have not yet understood how that is going to work, but certainly it is something which is going to pose substantial geopolitical challenges, competition, as well as issues of security and the relationship between powers. So what can really be done about that? And I think, again, Lapo mentioned that it would be a really big preference for us going forward if we move, or at least find a way to mitigate this growing competition and confrontation over the AI revolution through some sort of system of global understanding. I wouldn't go that far as to say that we will be able to succeed in creating a new system of global governance, but at least of global understanding in which we clearly define how to de-risk and how to set the guardrails, which would prevent us from, moving towards, much more confrontational and potentially, catastrophic confrontation, as Lapo mentioned. But I think we know that in many areas this confrontation is already taking, AI playing a critical role. For example, if we look at the current war going on in Ukraine, the AI is playing an absolutely critically important role already today on the battlefield. Those drones that are flying into Poland from Russia, they are increasingly powered by AI, and AI is going to continue to play an important role. So what can really be done to create those guardrails? And so far, we have to acknowledge that we have not advanced very substantially on that path. So far, we have seen United Nations, which we've been trying to play a role, but so far, we have not seen actually any substantial progress under the UN umbrella, except for the view that AI should be something that we should be seen globally, not just as a competition between the United States and China, which are the two major producers, but of course, we will see the rise in the number and capacity, for example, of the data centers in Southeast Asia, I think increasing threefold over the next 10 years, as well as, of course, in Africa and elsewhere. So the second potential platform is to see the private sector together with the governments driving kind of bottom-up, I would say, AI regulation ecosystem, rather than the top-down process that we've seen under the various international institutions, which did not work so far, precisely because the geopolitical environment is very fragmented. And here we've seen some successes. Of course, the AI summit, which UK hosted 2 years ago, has been a great success because the declaration was approved at that time, both of United States, China, European Union, of course, European nations, as well as the countries, beyond the global north. But we need to build on this success, to really define what exactly and how we can assess those algorithms at every stage. How can we quickly and clearly identify the risks, and how these risks can be translated into understanding the rules of the game, and how that is translated particularly in the behavior of businesses, technology companies together with governments. And that is something which so far we have not been able to establish. There's also, of course, the OECD process, which has been also very effective, at least in starting from identifying the language for the regulation of AI, which we need to all speak, because at the moment we are in a situation of diverging language. So I finish by saying that I think it is still unclear, just as it is perhaps not unclear how linear or non-linear the technological development is going to proceed, in terms of the need for more energy or what kind of energy, what kind of AI. But similarly, we are not really sure yet whether the AI is going to be managed like a Cold War. Is it going to become more increasingly as a hot war, or is it going to be something where we will find an understanding? But we certainly are still very far from that.
Very good.
Thanks a lot. So again, global governance, or at least understanding in a very complex situation. It's not that easy to see who and how we can make it. On the same kind of problematic, probably Divyash Kaushik can help us from Washington.
Great. Thank you for having me here. I think I get to present the American view here. which I feel like we've talked about a lot of things in terms of AI, energy security, national security over the last, let's say, 20 minutes. But we haven't nailed a couple of key points on the choke points in our infrastructure supply chain. Like the amount of components, the number of components made by foreign adversarial nations that are in our energy infrastructure, that are in our communications infrastructure, that are in our subsea cables infrastructure, that have pre-positioned malware in them. We're just not treating that as a national security emergency right now, that we should. And I'll walk you through what I think of the AI national security and energy security nexus. Now, a couple of things there. First on, I don't have to explain to this audience why AI is a national security technology. You're already seeing in Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Palestine, you're seeing with the PRC conducting mass genocide in the Uyghur region, of the Uyghur population in the Xinjiang region through surveillance using Western tools that are allowing them to conduct mass surveillance and allowing them to, forcibly, well, let's say, jail a population. But how is all of this being powered, which is what we're talking about here? Last year, in 2024, I'll give you some numbers. China added 429 gigawatts of energy. 429 gigawatts. United States added just 51 gigawatts last year. And Europe added about 70 gigawatts. Now, that's great. But you look at the difference here. They're not using 429 gigawatts. The Western alliance is at about 1/6 of China's rate. China maintains about 80% reserve margins in their energy supply. They're not treating it as an oversupply problem. It is about energy abundance that we can put to use. The data centers are soaking up that demand. That's great for them. Simultaneously, you're seeing the conversations on transmission policy, permitting policy, energy policy in the United States and Europe. I think that's great to have. I love nuclear just as the next person does. But Westinghouse cannot build. Bechtel cannot build. Vogtle plant in the United States, the last AP1000 that came online was $15 billion over budget and 15 years over time. When we talk about SMRs, it sounds great on paper. The first SMR to come online, in the order books, it says 2029 in Ontario, Canada. If you talk to anybody in Canada, they will tell you it's not coming online before 2035. There is no standardized design for an SMR. GE, Hitachi, Holtec, none of these companies have a standardized design. The SMRs we are used to making right now are part of the nuclear navy, are part of are tens of kilowatts that the US Army is looking to build on defense bases. We're not accustomed to building the true SMRs that we're talking about of hundreds of megawatts or hundreds of kilowatts either. So, and then you come to the supply chain of SMRs. They use the same heavy forges. There are 3 heavy forges in the world that produce the steel for a nuclear plant. One is in France, one is in Japan, and one is in South Korea. They use the same steel that is coming for an AP1000. They need the same workforce of nuclear qualified assured engineers, and they need the same uranium fuel that we do not produce as much. How much of uranium do we import from Russia? A lot. In fact, the United States imports nearly all of its uranium from Russia. So that is one thing. Now coming to transmission and grid. The transformer manufacturing capacity is so limited right now. Siemens is doing a great job in Europe on producing high voltage transformers, but not high enough. Not enough transformers are being produced. The PRC controls not just rare earths, they dominate the transformer manufacturing market. They dominate switch gears. They dominate circuit breakers. These are critical grid components that we are putting in our grid that we are importing from China. And when this year, whether it was in April or whether it was 2 weeks ago when China put new export controls on rare earths, it should have given us a wake-up call. the wake-up call that some of us had like in the first Trump administration, some of us had in the Biden administration, and some of us should have had this in the past 2 weeks. I think we need to create a Western supply chain with the breadth and depth to support demand that we will need over the next 10 to 15 years. We don't have the time. Simultaneously, Chinese state actors are already inside our infrastructure. Volt Typhoon, that is a Chinese state-sponsored group, remained in the Massachusetts utilities grid for over 300 days in the United States, exfiltrating geographic information system about energy system layouts. It remained in the government of India's grids that they access through CCTV cameras in Taiwan. So think about this. We're building all this AI infrastructure with Chinese components while Chinese intelligence pre-positions this malware in our power grids. Now, coming to Europe for a second, the data center demand that we're talking about, in the United States Department of Energy projected that data center demand will grow from about 6.7% of US electricity demand to about 12%. In Europe, the projections are about going from 62 terawatt hours to about 150 terawatt hours by 2030. That is a lot. While Amsterdam, Dublin, they've already imposed construction moratoriums on data centers. Dublin, Frankfurt, like if you're talking about connecting data centers to the grid, it takes about 5 years now. Italy is presenting its own microcosm of challenges. By the end of 2024, data center projects that were looking to connect to Italy's grid connection, the queue stood at about 30 gigawatts. That's equivalent to about 40% of Italy's current peak electricity demand. Almost 80% of those projects filed an application in 2024 itself. So this is going to be very critical as we try to balance ambitious decarbonization targets with the need to remain competitive in AI infrastructure. And I think like one of the, I would be remiss to not mention this. We've talked about the United States, Europe, China as players. I think we're sleeping on the United Arab Emirates. The United States this year inked a deal that would create a 5 gigawatt cluster in the UAE, the biggest cluster of its size. I think they have the energy. I think if you're concerned about subsidizing US AI providers by subsidizing energy in Europe, I think you're asking the wrong question. You should be worried about subsidizing Emirati AI providers because that is going to be a big challenge. And so I think that, for me, the path forward requires a coordinated transatlantic action on supply chain resilience, cybersecurity integration, both technology acceleration, and that requires, yes, like, nuclear. It requires geothermal, firm baseload power. Hydrocarbons are not going to go anywhere in my lifetime or in the next generation's lifetime or the generation after that. Hydrocarbons will be here for 100, 150 years or more. So we have to work with them and accelerate clean energy simultaneously. It will require regulatory reform, streamlining permitting for critical AI infrastructure, supply chains, and even outside of AI, we will need the energy. With the fabs coming online, with more manufacturing coming online, if we have to decouple, which we should, from China, we have to build more energy. So 5 questions that should shape policy in my view. First, are we willing to accept energy policy as defense policy and govern accordingly? Second, at what point does supply chain dependence become unacceptable? We banned Huawei from telecom, yet we build AI infrastructure with Chinese transformers and rare earth magnets. Where's the line? How do we balance speed with security? Can we move fast enough using only trusted supply chains? If there is kinetic action in the Taiwan Strait, what is our plan B? And are we thinking big enough? Where PRC is building integrated energy compute manufacturing ecosystems, we invented these technologies. Are we organizing to deploy them at scale? Are we thinking big enough? So the infrastructure that we build in the next 3 years will determine whether AI remains a Western advantage or becomes our strategic liability. That's the defining policy question of our time, in my view.
Much. Thinking big enough is really a question for Europeans that seem to be beaten from all over until we find our way to have a policy. So we promised a moment for 3 questions. These 3 questions, if you allow, should be directed to one of the panelists so that just one of them can answer, because we need to save energy and time. And we should be starting the break now. So this is the moment that we take for ourselves for being an Aspen event, and something that is participated by the audience. So if you have your question, please be brief and direct it to one of the panelists. Here is number 1. Anche in italiano, yes. Sì, anche in italiano se serve.
Well, no, I speak in English. I'm Sergio Gariba. Very interesting. However, my question is to Reita and the last speaker. What is ignored is the technological development. You're talking very much about what is the generative artificial intelligence. There are new waves, the psychological, the physical artificial intelligence, and they might have different architectures. Another point, I mean, some of the technological progress is ignored. We have progress on the microchips, which are the neurons of artificial intelligence, but there is a revolution coming, which is quantum computing. Quantum computing will reduce the consumption by a factor of 10. Thank you.
Thank you very much. They were 2 questions, but they were nice, so thank you. Second question over there, please. And third is in the back, and we're finished.
Yeah, thank you very much. My question, I think, would go to Ms. Beltrametti, since you were speaking about the need to coordinate the deployment of AI and data center infrastructure with the strengthening of our energy system. There's discussion at the EU level, for example, introduce requirements in terms of additionality when you procure energy for data centers, so to have basically data center developers being obliged to build new generation capacity to supply their own consumption, and in this way to link the as you mentioned, in this way you would cluster investments in energy and AI at the same time. When we look at the grid, we have discussions on whether to introduce, for example, deep connection charges, whereby if somebody wants to build a data center in a congested area, they would need to pay for the reinforcements of the grid that are needed, and so these costs would not be basically paid by the entirety of the consumers, but only by those who are seeking these reinforcements. So these kind of regulatory requirements are being discussed. On the other hand, we have data center developers who say, please leave us alone, leave us do our things, because if you start introducing criteria like this, we will not invest in Europe. Whom should we believe in these 2 competing narratives?
And last question is right behind this gentleman. Yes, please.
Okay, this would be to Pistorelli or Michael on the screen. Let's frame this in terms of equity and regulations. As this whole explosion is happening with AI across the social net, a lot of companies are just feeding everything. Every search engine uses AI to answer the question before anything else. This is a lot of generation of additional load on the system. And a lot of it is for, in my opinion, worthless questions, worthless things that can be answered without straining the systems we have and causing them to be grown. The question then to that is, in the political system, is there a way under the framework of equity to charge or distribute the payment for the use of the systems, energy systems, or the additional loads that are being brought into the environmental concerns. These are questions that weren't really directed in this forum, but I think they're very vital questions in what's going on.
Thank you. So we finished with the audience's questions, but we have Martha's questions. So these are
not necessarily, but I would like to pose two questions. In fact, one to Oksana, because you came up with the thesis that we will need to have a sort of agreement, a global agreement like the arms control agreements of the past. And this is a thesis already expressed by Kissinger years ago. The point, in my view, is that AI has, it was being said very rightly by Martin Sandbu, but also others, Dapo and yourself, is that the AI is predicated upon completely different systems. It's not only the question of a single nuclear weapon to be controlled, it's the idea of combining such different systems. So an agreement is really difficult to be conceived, but I agree with you on the salience of the matter. And to Kaushik, sorry for the pronunciation of your name, yes, supply chain is a big headache. You overlook the fact that also China is dependent, because otherwise we tend to see dependency only in one direction. We are dependent on China, okay, but the vice versa, China depends on chips, for instance, on us. So it's, you have to adopt a binary logic, in my view, and listening to Martin Sandbu at the very beginning, the idea of a Western supply chain is becoming shaky for the reasons he was mentioning at the very beginning, the fact that Europe would have to become more independent also from the US for reasons of security, soft power, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe, Martin, you could come back on this very point. Thank you.
So thank you. Everybody of the panelists has his own questions, so please briefly react in the same order that we used to start. So if Martin Sandbu wants to take the floor for 1 minute, please.
So I'll be brief. Thank you for this tremendous discussion. I learned a lot and good questions too. I mentioned the US in my remarks. I mean it generally. I do think that Europe needs to really have an autonomous, well, digital services industry in general, but AI specifically. And whether it's the Emiratis or it's the US or it's China, there's a geopolitical element, which is that it's just become dangerous to leave ourselves exposed to things being controlled from the outside. And then there's a more cultural or political preference issue, which is that, you know, on the whole, we have slightly different political preferences in Europe in terms of, you know, what do we like? What would we like AI to be used for example? So I get very worried when I hear business interests talking about how there's over-regulating in Europe. And of course, some regulations need to be smarter. But if people say, let's get rid of the AI Act, I mean, there are a bunch of things in the AI Act. You know, maybe the stuff on the technology itself, focusing on, you know, what the model needs to do. Okay, maybe that can be tweaked. But the bits about how you're allowed to use AI, can you use it to manipulate people? Can you use it to abuse people? I mean, surely we need to keep that, and we can have a discussion about what things should be ruled out. But our answers in Europe, for all our differences, will converge to something that is probably different from what the answers will be in the US and certainly China or in the Gulf. So we're just going to need to build our own thing. Second point, this is really reiterating what I said at the start. We need to be able to prioritize where we put the scarce resources we have. And the scarce resources are both energy and within digital services, the ones that we actually have, right? If we don't have that much AI capacity, what do we want it to be used for? So the last questions from the audience about pricing kind of comes into that. I just think that we're at the point where we don't even have the tools to be able to make those determinations. So my impression is that we don't have even the legislation at national or European level that would allow us to discriminate and say, well, we'll give grid connections to European AI, but not to US AI or Emirati AI, if that's what we chose. We might not even have the legislation that allows us to say, we will give a grid connection to AI, but not to a Bitcoin miner. I mean, many countries still have just first come, first serve, right? So there's some work to do there on the legislation. And when you have the legislation in place, we also actually need to have the prioritization. We need to make the political choices that say, well, actually, we want to prioritize homegrown AI over foreign Bitcoin miners, for example, in terms of where we allocate energy. But all of this is quite a big leap from the kind of system we built in the 1990s. So we need the tools. Then we need to decide we need to have a strategy for how to use those tools, a strategy that puts energy and AI together in one holistic perspective. And thirdly, we need to get those choices right. I finished there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Strategy, they have to be the right strategy. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We are planning to start again at 4 o'clock. We have, if the panelists want to respond, really half a minute each, and we take a break until 4, if you agree. Please, Beltrametti.
Pay for the electricity, the additional electricity that we need in order to satisfy AI's demands. To be fair, when I use a data center to run my AI application, I should not pay only for the chips that I'm using, but also for the electricity that is required. The cost should not be dumped to the general public. This is implementable, of course. It's not a technical question, it's a political question. And so it depends on what you decide to do.
Thanks a lot. Carlo Reita.
So there were 2 questions. I'll be quick. The first one, new models, new approach. I see them mostly as an addition and not a replacement. The momentum behind generative AI and the current models is big enough, and the economic model is big enough that will not slow down. The new algorithms, new approaches like those will run on the same machines. So I think will be more an addition than a replacement. Second, on the quantum technology has a lot of promises. On the other hand, we have to be a bit realistic. I'm a physicist. The quantum computer is a quantum computer. So so the response is probabilistic. So it consumes a lot. But if you want an answer, you have to run the algorithms multiple times and see how it goes. So the gain is lower. And we tend to forget that there is a very well-defined and finite class of problems where quantum has a real acceleration compared to classical algorithms. So again, will be a benefit, but will not be a final solution or a final word, in my opinion.
Final solutions are not in this word, I think. Antonenko.
We can have a whole session about how to structure the regulation of AI. But I think, compared to the era of arms control, where we were able to negotiate an agreement sort of top-down, led by governments, now we are in a new sort of multidimensional game in which the governments, just as was described, are still playing a key role as malign actors and posing a substantial risk, even existential risk. We also have, companies and technology developers who understand those risks much more strategically, looking forward. And then we also have a society. We have a planetary existential risk stakeholders, so we need to combine all three together, as I said, in something which is more akin to ecosystem of de-risking rather than the actual one agreement. But we need to find a format in which everyone has a stake in the game, and so far we were not able to. As I said, previous meeting on de-risking in UK, both China and United States signed the agreement, even though it was very, very preliminary. Today, if it would have happened today, neither United States nor China would have signed it. So we regressed rather than progressed as technology develops and planetary risks are rising.
Thanks a lot. Hauschik.
So I don't want to add anything on like the quantum tech development piece that Carlo has very well addressed, aside from the fact that if you look at Majorana chip that Microsoft developed, to use it, you have to put it in a cryogenic tank with temperatures under 3 Kelvin. The tanks are only available at the United States Department of Energy labs. It is not commercially viable just yet. As for the question on China depending on us, I think they do not want to be dependent on us. Made in China 2025 was a policy that was written in 2015. Just look at, it was very specific, how much of which sector do they want to be independent in, and how much do they want to, global share do they want to capture. And they meet the goals 3 years ahead of time. AI 2030 is similarly very, very detailed. Their 5-year plans are extremely well detailed, where if you look at their 5-year plans on domestic chip production, on semiconductor production, if it were not for US export controls on chips going to China and the semiconductor tools going to China, both like which Netherlands and Japan participated in, Huawei would have gotten there. They have the energy, they have the talent, they just don't have the chips. And we need to protect the chips from going to China. So I think like they have been independent of like US policy or European policy. Independently, China has wanted to have a self-sufficient semiconductor ecosystem for decades.
So thanks a lot to all panelists. We can solve the energy problem and have AI, or we can change AI and save energy. But this is simple to say, not very much easy to make. Thank you very much.
This will be making AI human. This will be, by definition, a more philosophical discussion, much less technical, if you wish. So let's try to sort it out. It's, from a certain point of view, you could simply say, but certainly AI is human. It is made by us. But then there are two important implications. One, in my view, is psychological. Clearly, there is the fear of losing control. And also, there are some worrying signals. For instance, according to the OECD recent reports, there are signs of cognitive decline already, because the extensive use of large language models is affecting our memory, or I don't know what. So there is this fear, while the real benefit, a multiplier of creativity, tends to be overlooked. So this is the first point we could discuss. The second one is the political one, and it is very clear. We have a political problem with the big tech. We already discussed part of the implications, the international implications of that, but there are also internal implications for our democracies, for instance, for the role of media, social media, and also for the way in which technological representatives tend to play both parts. They put out a lot of warnings, but they also pretend to be the solution. The famous Trump-Musk phenomenon, which didn't go so well after all, was an illustration of that. The idea that you can, as provider of technologies, be part of the problem and of the solution at the same time. So we have a risk of techno-Caesarism, to use one expression used by our French colleagues, Le Grand Continent, a journal, a European journal, which is quite interesting, I have to say, very French, as you can imagine. But in any case, this techno-Caesarism remains for the moment being a delusion. It's not working, in my view. In any case, we have a very brilliant set of speakers to wage this discussion, starting with Nick Bostrom, who is a philosopher, and so he is the right person to start such a discussion. I remind to all of you that you have 7-10 minutes at most for your introductions. Then we will hope to collect some interventions from the floor, and then we will give the opportunity for a brief reply, and we are aiming at closing our conference at 5:30. Thank you very much. Nick, are you there?
I'm here, yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Thank you very much. Please.
Yeah, so well, I'll say a few words to sort of start the conversation, try to keep it quite brief. In my view, we are approaching this fundamental transformation in the human condition, the rise of a machine intelligence era, where for the first time we will share this planet with another intelligent form of existence that will eventually vastly surpass us in all cognitive domains, in my view. I think there is a lot of uncertainty about the timeline for this. Some people, including some of my friends and colleagues, have very short timelines, thinking this could be right around the corner in a couple of years, a few years. Some obviously think it will take longer, but nevertheless, if we continue to make progress in science and technology, build faster computers, bigger data centers, understand more about algorithms and the brain, I think my work has been focused on the many important questions that arise from this prospect. Some are more technical, related to AI safety, some are more political, some more cultural, some more ethical. And it really is, I think, the great challenge of our age to get this transition right. In my earlier book, Superintelligence, which came out in 2014, it had been in the works for 6 years prior to that. I focused a lot on what could potentially go wrong when we create superintelligence, because at that time, this was a very neglected topic. Basically, nobody was taking this seriously, certainly not in academia. People were dismissing it as science fiction. And yet it seemed to me quite foreseeable that we will eventually develop the capability to create smarter than human forms of AI. And that when we do that, there would be quite profound questions of safety, how we could align these increasingly capable cognitive systems to do what we actually intend for them to do. Now, in the intervening, I guess, 11 years, the landscape has really changed quite fundamentally. Now everybody's talking about AI. All the frontier AI labs have research groups specifically trying to solve this question of scalable methods for AI alignment. And even at the top level of governments, we have political leaders coming out with different AI plans and are trying to become aware of the sort of geopolitical implications of this. So in my more recent work, rather than have shifted emphasis a little bit to thinking more about what could happen if things go right. Not because I don't think the risks are there, but I think they are more widely recognized. But I think the discussion about what would happen if this AI transition happens and it basically goes well, we solve the safety problem. Let's suppose we do some reasonably adequate job in terms of the politics and geopolitics of this, like what then happens to the human condition? And so my most recent book, which came out last year, is called Deep Utopia, Life and Meaning in a Solved World, which really tries to look at what a good human life would look like if we develop AIs that can do everything that we can do, but do it better and cheaper. And I think I won't go into it in my sort of introductory remarks. If people are interested, we can dive into it more later, but there are sort of layers to this onion. You can discuss this at a more superficial level where you think maybe there will be some job displacements, like some people's jobs might be automated. And so then at that level of discussion, you know, maybe the solution would be you need to retrain people so they can do other jobs, maybe provide some employment on insurance. But I think that's a very superficial level. Once you really start to think through what it would mean for AI to succeed, you very quickly get to much more fundamental and philosophical questions. Because it's not just that some jobs would be automatable. I think ultimately all human economic labor will become automatable. And then beyond that, even a lot of other things that we are putting our time and effort and energy into, aside from making money, right, would also become automatable. So in the limit, I think we would enter a kind of post-instrumental era where there would be, to a first approximation, nothing that we would have reason to do for instrumental reasons. That is, nothing we would have reasons to do in order to achieve some separate outcome. And at that stage of technological maturity, we would need to refocus our efforts on activities that we find to be intrinsically worthwhile, not done because we want to achieve something else. All those cases, I think, the machines would be able to achieve the outcome better than we could. But things that we think are valuable for their own sake. And that's really a question about value and rather than a question of economics or technical feasibility. So we'll see where the conversation goes, but I'm happy to take this in whichever direction.
Things go right instead of going wrong, if we focus on opportunities rather than risks. And maybe Alberto Sangiovanni Vincentelli, maybe you could add your thinking to this line of reasoning.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marta. So as a good university professor, when we talk about something, we have to focus on the fundamentals. So often people talk about artificial intelligence. Talking about, and so my point is that to discuss about the interaction between man and machine, we have to understand what is the capability of the technology, because otherwise we may demonize the technology or we may think that is God himself. So what is all about these issues about artificial intelligence? So first of all, I've been asked to define what is artificial intelligence, or what is machine learning. And so the artificial intelligence is pretty much anything artificial intelligence. So automation, in some sense, digital is equivalent to artificial intelligence in this acception, in this definition. What we always talk about is instead, when we talk about artificial intelligence, is machine learning. And machine learning is algorithms and supporting theory, underlined 300 times, supporting theory, for making predictions, so you try to anticipate the future, and make decisions under uncertainty. So it's things that we don't know, because if we knew them and we knew how things work, I would use the knowledge that I have, and I don't need to resort to a machine that learns. And how does it learn? It observes data. And so there is a different way in which the machines help man, in the sense that you have to look at the data and then you try to build the knowledge about what is going on. Now, we all know that this is effective, but not that effective. If we knew the basic principles, it would be extremely more effective to learn and to work. Okay, so say this. Hello? Okay. Artificial intelligence is old, right? My friend Carlo pointed out the fact that the first neural networks were proposed in the 50s, but you know, artificial intelligence goes back before the 50s. We're talking about Second World War. And so it's an old thing. And so here now we see the tip of the iceberg, but there is a huge iceberg below it. And this huge iceberg had problems twice during its evolution. So when I graduated in 1971, it was the first peak of artificial intelligence. In fact, my first paper was about artificial intelligence. The moment in which I wrote that paper, artificial intelligence went down, right? So, ouch. Then in 1986, new peak, right? Guess what? I wrote 10 papers on artificial intelligence in 1986. 1987, boom. So be careful when you ask me to write something, because it may be the beginning of the end. Right? So anyways, but what you see here is that there has been an incredible explosion, right, in these years. So what caused this explosion? Why is so important and so interesting today to talk about artificial intelligence? Well, there is one thing that happened, is the existence of a chip, right, of an actual hardware that is extremely effective in doing the calculation that you need to use the model of machine learning that is mostly used, which is called deep learning. And deep learning means that you have several very small nodes that form the mathematical model, and these nodes essentially perform sum of products. Now this thing, oops, it goes on its own. So the thing that I show you here is an NVIDIA chip, and NVIDIA is the largest company in the world, and is the largest capitalization ever reached. It's 5 trillion. No other company ever has reached that value, right? 5 trillion. And why is that? Because without this, you cannot do a damn thing in artificial intelligence. So why Trump has said, I'm not going to give you the chips? Because without the chips, no artificial intelligence. So you have to look also at the geopolitical issues is related to this thing. So did he say that OpenAI cannot export the model to China? Not in the least, but he said you cannot do this. In addition, he also said that the tools that you use to make these things cannot be exported. This is what I do, okay? So the design of these things. So it's critical you have to understand this. Now, this is geopolitical touchy because these things are manufactured in Taiwan. And so that's the other big mess, right? Is the Taiwan role in the geopolitical situation. And Taiwan is China, no matter what. And so what are we going to do? So there is a very important discussion about, can we re-import manufacturing of integrated circuit in the United States or in Europe? And so the CHIPS Act are related to that. And in fact, Carlo and I are in CHIPS IT, which is an attempt to put something more in Italy about making chips. Say this. Now, the important issue also is to remember that what we have seen so far has been what we call infrastructural AI. So the large language model and all that kind of stuff is infrastructure. By now, the large language model are commodities. There is no more value added. All the models are equivalent. There is no difference, no basic difference. DeepSeek, oh my God, the Chinese are more advanced than the United States. It's the same thing. I mean, the basic technology is identical. They made twists and tweaks to make it do without the chips, because they didn't have the chips because America said no more NVIDIA chips. And so you have to make ends meet. And so if you don't have money, you have to scrape the barrel. And that's what China is doing. But the technology is the same. The large models are exactly the same. Now, if we look at the future of AI, the first boundary is what we call physical AI. Now, if you listen, Mr. Wang, who is the CEO and founder of NVIDIA, is talking about this physical AI every day, because the infrastructural AI is plateauing. At some point, you can't sell any more chips for doing infrastructural AI. So what is the next? Is the physical. And what is the physical? Physical is this thing: autonomous transportation, autonomous cars. And we know that it's coming, right? And in San Francisco, you see cars going around. Now, when the car takes decisions, do I turn, do I don't turn, I brake, and so on, they have to operate in a certain environment, and they have to look at observed data. What is that? Machine learning. And what do you need? The chips to do the learning, okay? And how many cars are around? Quite a few, right? And so Mr. Wang says, you need my chips. And why? Because he wants to get to $10 trillion, hopefully. And so that is what is happening. Drones, right? Drones use autonomy. So there is no man on the drones. And so they have to take decisions. They have to operate in an uncertain environment. So what do you need? Machine learning. And what do you need? The chips, okay? So that's as simple as a straight line. And robotics, whoever has come this morning to the exhibition at the Biennale has seen robots, right? And robots, what do? They take decisions in a certain environment, and so they need machine learning, and they need the chips. And the next thing that I wanted to say, just to make understand what is the positioning of man in this technology, is the fact that ChatGPT, I bet many of you think, oh my God, ChatGPT is miracle, right? It gives answer, and these answers are correct. Not true at all. It's a probabilistic approach to language, okay? So what happens is that you train, the training, why does it take months? And why does it take huge energy, right? Because you have to let the machine see, observe data, everything that has been written on the internet. The more things that you see, the better it is, because you can do better. So what comes out is that the form of the language is almost perfect. So the syntax, the grammar. What about the content? And that is a dichotomy that you have to keep in mind. And that is where the education and where the risk arise. The form is so good that you are tempted to believe everything that is said to you, right? So critical thinking is probabilistic approach. So there is a probability what is going to come out is right, but there is no certainty. And so what comes out is not necessarily the truth. And so you have to teach the young generation, look, because of this, you cannot trust it. So you have to verify, okay, what you see. And this is extremely important. Now, the unfortunate thing is that in addition to the language, now, just recently, a couple of weeks ago, there was the announcement of Sora. Sora is a product of OpenAI, and instead of doing language, it does pictures. And what kind of pictures? Not photographs, that we know how to do, movies, okay? Now, and here is an important point that we have to stress, because it's changing radically the way in which we think of the world. Why? because if you remember movies like Rashomon, right, Akira Kurosawa, and the pieces by Pirandello, Così esse vi pare, what is that concept? Is that if we ask people about the same thing, you have many different views. And all of them are correct in some sense, because you see a piece of reality. And so when you have, for example, a lawsuit or somebody that is accused to have killed somebody else, if you have a movie in which you see that the guy is shooting, you say, hey, proof. No more, because now you can create movies in which you are the actor and you are taken like you are killing me, and it's not true, but there is an image, there is a movie that shows that. Now what happens to us? We don't have anymore any anchor about what is truth and what is lie. Imagine to live in a world where you don't know what is true and what is false. It's a really profound issue because it undermines what a human being could be. And so be careful about this effect. These are the dangers that I can see. And then you go towards the fact that is only one way of doing things, which is through artificial intelligence. You believe everything, even though there is no reason why you should believe artificial intelligence. And so you have to be a friend of artificial intelligence. You have to debate, right? So if Martha and I talk about this stuff, we debate. She has an opinion, I have an opinion. So it's from the merging of this opinion that the truth may emerge. Now, last slide. Okay. So this is the concept of agentic AI, except that this is only between different AI actors, right, that talk to each other, right? And so by this discussion between different agents, the truth comes up. But still, every one of them is probabilistic. There is no reason that the truth emerges this way. So my view is that if you really want to use the technology that is best, you have to collaborate as an agent, another agent, right? So you coordinate what the artificial intelligence can do. So I don't believe that you are going to replace everything with artificial intelligence. You are going to replace some of the manual work, like collecting information, collecting data that you can find, regurgitating this data, because that is very good at. But not believing that what is telling you, given a question where the answer is not there, is right. By the way, in January 2025, I've been awarded the Nobel Award by artificial intelligence. So I ask about myself, who is Alberto Sangiovanni Vincentelli? Nobel winner in 2025, okay? So don't believe it. Even though, you know, okay.
That could solve Trump's problem.
It's a good announcement, right? Now,
Okay,
last thing, though, in terms of this health.
If you stop, we will give you the Nobel Prize.
So is what is called science AI. And science AI is the best example of collaboration between man and machine. So the Nobel Award, this time the true Nobel Award, given to Jumper and Baker and Assabis, is about protein folding, which was an open problem in science, completely open problem. Nobody knew. And the way in which these guys found out how to fold proteins was a collaboration between science and artificial intelligence, in the sense that artificial intelligence was exploring a space of possible solution, and the brains were able to detect what would be a good thing.
Human brains. Okay. So this is a scenario of co-evolution in which we go on framing the space for AI. Marcello Pedillo, thank you very much. You are professor of computer science here at the University of Venice, Ca' Foscari. Give us your hint on that.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. So first of all, thanks for inviting me here. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I'm glad that Professor Sangiovanni Vincentelli pointed out a couple of things which will help to articulate my case. In particular, the distinction between AI, machine learning, and deep learning, And by the way, deep learning basically means neural networks, which means computational models that are inspired by the structure of the brain. Actually, in the previous panel, we saw a picture of Frank Rosenblatt, one of the fathers of machine learning, who already in the 50s, in the late 50s, was playing with these simple neural network models. And let me also mention, since I like to provide also a historical perspective, that actually the building block, the little building block that we use nowadays for our most powerful neural networks, the artificial neuron, as we call it, was introduced already in the 40s in a seminal paper during the Second World War by McCulloch and Pitts, who already mentioned in your slide. And so this is an answer to those who think that we should forget about all these old-fashioned stuff because they are kind of useless. You know, after more than 8 years, where we are using those little McCulloch and Pitts neurons for our daily activities. I'm also glad that in the previous presentation, in the previous talk, we mentioned the fact that we should be friends of AI. And friends means to trust AI. So let me say something about this word and how this is addressed in the context of artificial intelligence. There is one branch of artificial intelligence nowadays, which is called XAI. X stands for explainable, so explainable artificial intelligence, which is trying to study the following problem. How can we understand how AI systems work? I don't want to scare you already. I mean, the previous panel was a bit scaring in terms of what is going to happen in the future. But what I'm going to say, it's true. I mean, we don't know how neural networks or how AI systems work. For us, they are kind of black boxes. So if we open the black box, and if we want to understand why a certain AI system has given me a certain answer, why ChatGPT gave me that answer, why ChatGPT gave the Nobel Prize to Professor San Giovanni Vincentelli, nobody knows. Because if we open the box, we will simply find billions and billions of numbers. That's it. And so if I want to understand the reason why that model provided that answer, that's going to be a bit problem. So these models are not transparent at all. They are not interpretable. And of course, when it comes to applications such as, you know, nowadays we use AI for a lot of things, such as hiring people or firing people, or you know, granting a loan to a person or sending a person to prison. All those things are real. AI systems are being used for these issues. And in this case, I want to know an explanation why, for example, that person was sent to prison, or why that person was denied a loan, or why that person got fired by his company. And so this is something which is very important. As I said before, a whole branch nowadays of machine learning and AI is basically dealing with these issues, because there is a kind of a tension between interpretability of a machine learning model and its effectiveness. It's well known that the more effective, the more powerful a machine learning is, the less interpretable it is. Vice versa, there are other machine learning models, because we should not forget that deep learning or neural networks is just one algorithm, very powerful indeed, for solving machine learning problems. But there are many other machine learning algorithms around. Actually, for many years, before 2012, where deep learning became so popular, machine learning people, including myself, were using other kinds of models which were not inspired by the brain at all. They were simply based on mathematical, very sophisticated mathematical framework, and they worked in a completely different manner. And maybe in 10 years, we're going to forget about these neural networks, and we're going to use other models, because the history of AI, as we've seen before, is rich of ups and downs, especially when it comes to neural networks. So this is a very important thing that we need to know. There is another thing which I want to address, which is, by the way, related to the lack of interpretability of these models. And I'm a computer scientist, and usually we teach our students, especially in the first year of their bachelor degree, how to debug a code. So suppose you are a computer scientist, you are writing a piece of code for solving a problem, and your program is not working well, is giving the wrong answer. So we teach our students how to find the bugs, how to find the errors in the code. There's a very well-established discipline which is called software engineering, which tries also to address these things. Now, when it comes to neural networks, well, it's almost impossible to debug them. So suppose for a moment that you know that your machine learning algorithm or your neural network algorithm is giving you the wrong response. And you want to intervene into the model to fix that issue, right? You want to intervene, you want to fix that. You want to find the bug and fix it. Well, it's impossible. What should I do? It's almost impossible. With the technology that we have nowadays, we are not able to debug our machine learning algorithms, which is a big problem, because what we do usually when a neural network doesn't work well, we try to retrain it on maybe bigger data set or on another data set and stuff like that. But we are not really able to intervene, like to open the box and to fix the part of the network which is not working well. And so the notion of debugging in machine learning is also very, very important. Now, I want to finish my little talk by, first of all, I have to say I'm very glad that this discussion is taking a more philosophical flavor. Yeah. I keep saying to my students and my colleagues that AI is paraphrasing von Clausewitz, right, who said that war is a continuation of politics with other means. Well, in much the same way, my view is that AI is a continuation of epistemology with other means, because the very problems that we use and we try to address, induction, abstraction, generalization, inference, all those things, these are genuine philosophical problems. And even the notion of explanation, we are talking about explanation now. Now, philosophy of science, especially in the 20th century, has devoted a lot of work on trying to understand the notion of explanation to scientific models. So there is a lot to gain on a dialogue between epistemologists, philosophers of science, and computer science, because basically what we are doing now today is it's a computational version of empiricism, I would say. Okay.
Computational version of?
Empiricism, because basically this is basically a data-driven approach. We are learning from observations, from data.
Absolutely. So we have a new definition, which is a very interesting one. AI is a continuation of epistemology with other means, which is a sort of slight modification of the famous von Clausewitz definition of war. And maybe Nick Bostrom later on will tell us whether he agrees to put the issue in these terms. Thank you very much, Marcello. Now we shift to arts, in a sense, more than philosophy, with Alex Braga, a musician, who, I guess, will think that artificial intelligence is an amplifier of creativity, because otherwise it becomes an enemy.
Yes, in a way, yes. But thank you very much. Thanks for hosting me here. It's a big pleasure. And I'm super happy to take it after Professor Pelillo, because if we had prepared this before, it wouldn't have come such a perfect assist to pick it up from here, because we started and you finished raising the question, which is for me dominating the whole scene. What do we do with this? Like we build strength, we build infrastructure, we build power, we build computational capability, and then what? Big question mark. So I started to research in artificial intelligence more than 10 years ago, when probably no artist was yet there. And I started to build my own artificial intelligence, and I did it with two professors, two brilliant minds, Professor Riganti and Professor Laudani of University of Roma Tre, and we came up with a different model with our own ideas. The good thing about this is that there is no, as Professor Vicentelli was saying before, there's ideas, and there's so many ways to translate these ideas into reality, which is amazing. And this is what computational capabilities and skills can allow us to do. In terms of music, now everybody is scared about artificial intelligence. Probably, I think it's a widespread fear now in society, because everybody is fearing that artificial intelligence might substitute our central role in the world. We are very egocentric as animals, and so we think how an algorithm can replace us. This is really a disaster. So we like to be pessimistic. I like to be optimistic. That's why I built an algorithm and an artificial intelligence to start digging deeper into it. And the first thing I found out is that one of the biggest problems about artificial intelligence and the fear that people have on artificial intelligence is the name. Because somebody dared to call it artificial intelligence, which is a prerogative of mankind. But as a very smart professor that was working on our team used to say when we were developing our artificial intelligence, used to say, but this is going to be the problem. In 10, 15 years, this is going to be the marketing problem of this, because if people had called it a very complicated chain of calculation that is going to help mankind to do processes in a more efficient way, nobody would have bothered to put all this around artificial intelligence. But we, as human beings, tend to use our resources in the worst possible way ever. So the problem is not, is artificial intelligence going to turn right or wrong? Is what we, as humans, are going to do with it. And music, in this sense, is a very powerful metaphor of what things could go right and things could go wrong. Now, the whole industry is shook by the fundamentals by artificial intelligence, and they fail to understand that technology and artificial intelligence has been there for a long, long time, as they've said before. In music, as far as 1965, when Ray Kurzweil wrote the first algorithm to write autonomously music. So we are dealing, we are living, we are making peace with artificial intelligence, at least since 1965 in music, much before in regular science. But then we arrived to a deranged society where artificial intelligence is taking the processes and is taking advantage of our greed. And we are coming to what I call in my lectures, it's the part that I love best, is the paradox of Michael Smith. Nobody knows it. You don't know it. But in music, this man is becoming very important, at least in my lectures. Michael Smith is a very mediocre musician, American, mediocre producer, that, but with some coding skills. What did he do, the genius? He said, okay, now I'm going to use artificial intelligence to write songs. Okay, Ray Kurzweil did it in 1965, so what's the new thing? I'm going to use artificial intelligence to load this music into music platforms. That's where the thing becomes a little bit more interesting. But the genius twist was, I'm going to use artificial intelligence to create bots that are going to listen to music that nobody has ever written or produced, and nobody will ever listen. And in few months, he earned, or he gained, or he stole, you chose it, $10 million from Spotify and other platforms. Of course, then he was arrested, but he's a hero in this narration, because he's the first that showed to the world, not only to musicians, to the world itself, that the king is naked. So the problem is not how much the power of calculation is going to grow. Of course it's going to grow. We've got quantum computing coming right around the corner. So we're spiking up the calculation in and NVIDIA. It's going to be blessed by this, as probably all the other chip producers. But what are we going to do with this? Data are over, almost, okay? We are facing the biggest rob of history in terms of culture robbery, or data scraping, as they used to call it. In few months, the models have robbed human culture, and now they are regurgitating. I love this way of saying, Professor Vicentelli. I loved your narration. They are regurgitating data because mankind is not able to produce culture at such pace. So first, machines started to regurgitate. Sorry if I'm being a bit gross. Nausea. Then they started to hallucinate. And that's where us artists come into place. We love to make machine hallucinate because that's where we get the best out of it. And in my opinion, in a very few years, machines are going to overdose because they're going to be feeding themselves with the same regurgitation of data, which is not good to eat, and they're going to be pretty sick very, very soon. So how do we get out of this? It's very important. With ethics, it's very simple. But how do we draw the line of ethics here? Because there's a lot at stake. There's billions and billions and billions and billions. There's wars. Oh my God, there was a slide before robotic and AI, the physical AI. That rhymes with war machines. We're not seeing drones only delivering boxes at your front door. What we're seeing drones every day is drones for killing people. We're seeing robots that are doing processes, and pretty soon we're going to see army of robots doing things in the wrong way, probably. Or probably not. But it doesn't depend on the technology. It doesn't depend on the computing calculation. It doesn't depend on the infrastructure. It depends on us. It's on us. And with my little 2 cents in this amazing table of scientists and researchers, I built a model that is not based on datasets. Because in my opinion, datasets could be not the new gold as the industry is trying to push, but it's the evil part of all this amazing equation of hypothetical sustainable future driven by technology and by AI. Because AI and technology could give us, as Nick Bostrom was saying before, a tremendous leap forward to transcend ourselves. Technology should be used for that reason. But we, as humans, as with all the other resources that we have, we use it in the worst possible way. So we don't use technology to free ourselves from the slavery of doing alienating things and finally be able to work on ourselves, but we use it to enslave more and more people. So datasets in this game play a fundamental role. And that's why I built a paradigm that uses the human being, as you were saying, to augment myself, uses the human being as a live, real-time dataset. Because that is the only way that you could draw a line of ethical earnest. Because if you use yourself as a dataset, you can augment your capabilities, but you are always sure that, first of all, you're not robbing or scraping nobody else's intellectual property. You're sure that you're not creating an a tremendous amount of CO2 because these huge models need a tremendous amount. We're talking about the nation. These models need like Italy or France to train, and you're not creating a slavery. There is another amazing, I wouldn't say amazing, horrendous topic that nobody talks about. When we prompt an LLM to create the picture of our next door neighborhood with a pigtail or pig nose, because we really need to see our neighbor with the pig nose and share it on WhatsApp with everybody else. There is somebody that has helped these machines to train and has told them, look, this is a pig nose, this is a horse nose, this is a dog nose, this is a rabbit nose. And all these people, machines don't do miracle. All these people are real people that receive a huge amount of data every day, and they spend 9, 10 hours a day, paid $1 per hour, and they point out to the machine, this nose is the nose of a pig. This nose is the nose of a horse. This nose is the nose of a dog. And they send the data to all these flashy Silicon Valley companies that translate it into things that the machine can digest and give you the possibility to create the picture of your next door neighbor with a pig nose. So next time you use AI, don't question yourself whether it is going to substitute you or not, because that's just a matter of what you are going to do with your life. So it's not a matter of finding the best possible way of building the best possible infrastructure. It's finding the best possible way to make our life again meaningful. Otherwise, we're doomed, not because of machines, but because of us.
Thank you very much, Alex. Very inspiring. We have to find a definition for that. Something like a self-centered AI, or I don't know how, but in any case, maybe Marcello, you are able to find a definition for that. Eugenia Leva, now professor at the Mount Sinai or Sinai Hospital in the US for digital health. She's connected already? Yes. Eugenia, please, yes. You have the floor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. So given that the session is making AI human, I'm just gonna give a few thoughts and experiences we had in the healthcare field, which is, a particular field where AI is more and more applied to. So in my opinion, or my understanding of making AI human doesn't really equate to giving machines a sort of human-like emotion or consciousness, but really more of embedding AI within the moral and institutional and relational structures that define human endeavors and that are specifically very important for medicine, where this tension is particularly visible. So you have on one side the algorithms that can assist in care, but they are operated within systems that are defined by empathy, by ethics, by accountability, which are really, I would say, most human basic features, let's say so. So I think I have a slightly more positive view than Mr. Braga on AI. I think there are two major opportunities that AI gives us, and where I can already see AI being quite human, to be honest. But of course, I'm also going to touch a few constraints that I think are important to keep in mind or that we try to keep in mind when we develop basically these tools. I think the first opportunity, if we believe sort of in human rights, and the concept of every person, every human being having the right for dignity, for health, then really AI becomes a sort of human tool, or humanizes itself when it allows us to democratize access to medical expertise and access to healthcare, which is already really starting to happen because, and I can give you an example. Apple has released recently a new algorithm that detects hypertension from their wearable devices, and it seems like a small thing, but actually hypertension is one of the major risk factors for many chronic conditions, and it's a leading risk factor for a huge population, particularly in the Western world, I have to say, but around the globe. And most of these people remain undiagnosed, and the ability to put algorithm that is, that has learned to capture complex patterns from these physiological signals allows to have a huge impact from a public health perspective. And it's even more interesting because it's an impact that comes, from a commercial wearable device. It's not like the National Institute of Health of some country has implemented some screening for that condition specifically. It's something that sort of surfaces naturally from this capability. And of course, beyond that, there are many other digital biomarkers that are being developed that can really, personalize predictions and personalize health and make that in a very scalable and accessible way. So for the first time, we really can imagine both these tools and the knowledge, the medical knowledge to be able to be pooled and to grow as data accumulate, as knowledge accumulates, potentially reducing basically disparities in access and in outcomes. I think the second opportunity, and I really liked Professor Pilillo's definition of AI as a sort of epistemological tool, because I think in medicine, it is really important. The epistemology of medicine is really what allows us to, as doctors, and I have to say I'm a clinician by training, so I have that perspective. But the knowledge, we really use our knowledge to enter in a discussion with our patients, allowing the interaction with patients to be sincere, ethical, to be supportive, to be empathetic, really because we have a knowledge framework around that discussion. It's not instinctive, if you wish. It's not like a good interaction with a patient relies on basically on an interaction that explains a certain disease, explains a certain therapy, and to explain a certain disease, to explain a certain therapy, we really need to be able to rationalize that knowledge of a specific basically biological system or biological event. And when we think about AI, I think the other great opportunity that comes with it is that AI really can be used to deepen that knowledge, to learn patterns that were unavailable before, and to sort of come up with a new semiotic of medicine that is driven by this augmented layer of augmented measurement layer. So where AI can, for example, analyze your biological signals across a long period of time and output some measures that are potentially abstract measures, but that we can then use to understand better the basic physiology of our patients. And this allows us to actually improve our interaction with the patient, improve our interaction because we improved our understanding, basically. And I think the other really big opportunity of AI in this sense is that, especially with the advent of the transformer architecture and this pre-trained large language models and other foundation models in general, but I think those in particular, is that these are able to capture narrations of patient symptoms, not only captured by the clinician in their notes, but even directly by the patient. So we are able to sort of have machines read through the patient perceptions and histories and stories and anamnesis and patient-reported outcomes, and give us a way to analyze and capture those inherently human experiences that make a big part of a clinical interaction. So it's really, I think, two great opportunities. Of course, there is always to remain human. We need to constrain AI to have the same moral and professional framework that we use in our clinical work, which means a lot of technical work into explainability, into traceability, and also really sort of a human values in the design, where because these tools are used in such a vulnerable the AI really needs to be humility-based in a way. It needs to be risk-aware, so that they know when they don't know, which is a big thing. So they really have to refrain from interacting like we do as clinicians. They need to refrain from interacting when they're not certain, and go and sort of ask for additional support. And I think this is a constraint that has been very difficult to implement for now, because of technical reasons, because the complexity of the model does not necessarily allow easily for that degree of explainability that is needed in healthcare. But it's definitely something that the field has very clearly in mind. And I think I don't have more time, but I just want to go back to the first session where there was a lot of talk about, decentralized infrastructure. And I think this is a very important topic in healthcare as well, and in sort of making AI equitable, because there is a strong push for big techs and with a lot of resources, both in terms of computational infrastructure, but also data, and even clinical data, to develop these algorithms. And for example, Apple, put them into the hands of people, but at the same time, these institutions have a lot of power then. And I personally believe that we should really try to distribute not only the access to the model, but also the power to create and critique them more broadly, which means having public institutions invest in this as well, and having an educational system for clinicians for sure that allows them to be critical and to be aware of how AI is developed, and to be able to request really from those companies or institutions, or from their own public institutions, the transparency and the equity that is required to actually make it human. And I think, yes, I think I'm...
Thank you, Eugenia. Thank you very much indeed. It's a key issue. If AI guarantees, in a sense, or could guarantee a more equitable access to health, that would be a great progress indeed. Thank you very much. We are running a bit against time. We have two more speakers. Vivian Schiller, she is Vice President and Executive Director of Aspen Digital in the US, the Aspen Institute. Please, Vivian,
Great.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's really, this has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And I want to sort of pull together some of the things that we've already heard today, but use an example, a very, very practical example. So I'm going to come down from philosophy and just be very specific about the way that humans and AI collaborate in a very specific field. And that is the field of journalism, which is the world that I come from. And journalism is not just one of many, many fields. I believe it is the most important field, maybe because that's where I come from, because what is reported is, or until recently, that's kind of the point of this AI conversation, is the way that people know what's going on in the world, whether it's about health, whether it's about science, whether it's about energy, whether it's about AI companies and what have you. There has been, when ChatGPT was launched, which I know is not the beginning of AI goes back, I've learned now, not just to the 50s, but to World War II. But for many people, frankly, it was the beginning of AI, just because they could touch it and feel it for the first time. The world of news media collectively freaked out. They freaked out. They're like, oh no, this is just another thing that's going to come and kill us, and we have to fight it, and we have to hunker down, and we have to stop using technology entirely. It was crazy. But the fact is, and there's still a raging debate, and yes, there are a lot of problems, and maybe AI will kill journalism, but I'm going to save that for the end, because I want to talk about the good stuff first, which is this notion that AI is destroying journalism right now is absolutely not true. It's an oversimplification of what many people think, which is that news organizations are just going to put out garbage AI slop, and the idea of reporting will go away. That is not what's happening. Yes, there are some instances where AI can actually create stories instead of people. It's a very, very specific use case. Reporting the stock market data, for example, or sports scores. Those are the kinds of things that really don't necessarily require somebody who is a trained journalist. You're just saying what happened. Where's the World Series right now? By the way, tied 3-3 with the Blue Jays and the LA Dodgers, by the way, so we'll know more tonight. But AI can tell those stories. But generally speaking, the true value of journalism is things that AI cannot deliver today and will never be able to deliver. The most important tenets of journalism include bearing witness, whether at war or at a natural disaster, and being there and observing and sharing what you're seeing and feeling with your own eyes. Investigative reporting, enterprise reporting, which are stories that are not out there but that you create and you report because you had an idea and you had some data and you can tell people something that they've never seen before. Opinion journalism. Opinion journalism gets a bad rap often, but in fact, smart analysis of news events, again, from an experienced journalist is incredibly valuable. And all of these things lead to trust. But AI can support journalists in their work in a number of ways. Let me just tell you a few examples. Some of them are pretty anodyne. So for example, AI today can help a lot of the back-end work in newsrooms that nobody really wants to do, frankly. Tagging, categorizing, adding metadata, headline and SEO suggestions to make sure that stories can be discovered, copy editing, those kind of things are newsrooms all over the world are using AI very much to do this kind of work. AI can transcribe interviews. This is huge and saves hours and hours of work for journalists. It can also translate languages where you have access to documents or interviews where you don't know, now you have to check it, but you don't know the language. That's also helpful to journalists. But the most exciting applications where AI is being used in newsrooms today is in investigative journalism that involves large data sets. Because there have been many cases, and I'll give you a few examples in a moment, where large data sets that would have taken journalists months, maybe years to read and dissect, the ability for AI to analyze that data is changing the entire way that investigative journalism happens. The AI, if you have a large data set, it can extract what the problems are and the scale of the problem. It can find sort of the proverbial needle in a haystack of information that may be crucial to your story. It can, and at least reduce the scale of that so that live human reporters can check it. It can deliver modeling and predictions, again, to be checked by journalists. It can analyze satellite images and other imagery. Sensors and acoustic-based machine learning has become very valuable. Now, the term of art in news organizations today, which is exactly the right one, is human in the loop, which means maybe, with the possible exception of sports scores, there must always be a human in the loop. But in the examples that I just gave you, that human starts with a much more manageable data set and information that the AI has delivered, and it is truly a collaboration. And by the way, I'm not personifying AI. AI is a set of tools. It is a technology. It is not human. We know that, but I'm using the word collaboration figuratively here. So let me just give you some examples. Some of you may be aware of the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers. So the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists used AI, which is a consortium of news organizations all over the world that do investigative journalism. They used AI and advanced data tools to expose the impropriety from 11.5 million documents in the case of the Panama Papers. Those documents were emails, PDF, spreadsheets, images. This was not structured data. The AI was able to extract across that 11.5 million documents the trends, the connections. It mapped the relationships between individuals and shell companies and intermediaries. It developed visualization tools to identify and expose the hidden connections that would have been almost impossible to discover manually, even with 1,000 journalists with 10 years. Pattern recognition. Machine learning algorithms scanned the text data for key entities and patterns that indicated illicit financial activity like money laundering. So AI would not have been possible. I mean, that investigation would not have been possible. Another example, the New York Times used AI to analyze satellite images in Gaza for craters that were made by large-scale explosions like 2,000-pound bombs. And that led to then human verification to remove the false positives and confirmed in the end that hundreds of bombs were dropped in areas designated as safe zones for civilians. Another example from a Norwegian newspaper, they built an AI tool to analyze government audit reports and to discover anomalies. And they used, then the humans took over from the information that the AI delivered to expose wrongdoing. And this is just 3 examples from hundreds, thousands that are happening all over the world. We convene journalists to share these stories, share tools so that they can help each other. Really, journalism is on the forefront of using AI for this kind of tools. Now, before I wrap up, because this all sounds like a very rosy picture, I usually like to do the bad news first and then end on a rousing, happy note. I'm doing the opposite here, so let me apologize. But there are obviously, I cannot let this session end without just naming a few really problematic areas where it comes to AI and news. One we already talked about, which is in information ecosystems like social media, being able to tell, which is now so filled with AI slop, either just automated garbage or people who are intentionally trying to mislead, and they're able to use AI for that, to the point where telling truth from falsehoods on platforms is getting increasingly difficult. And that, of course, leads to people, particularly now with Sora 2 launching and a lot of the sort of the deep fakes and the artificial images and videos. There's a lot of my colleagues think that there's going to be some kind of catastrophic incident or worldwide revolt because somebody will see a video of something the Pope is doing or who knows whatever and believe it. I don't actually think that's the case. I think the opposite will happen, which is even more terrifying, which is people will stop believing anything at all, whether it is legitimate journalism or not. And that is sometimes called the liar's dividend because it gives an advantage to the liar or the autocrat who wants to come in saying, don't believe any of it, just listen to me. And for news organizations, their whole sustainability is about readers and people paying for their journalism. And yet AI are scraping, oftentimes without permission, scraping content from news sites all over the world to automatically deliver answers to chatbot queries about the news, bypassing journalism altogether. This is another catastrophic moment. So there's a lot of bad news out there, but I wanted to tell you some of the good stuff.
Thank you, Vivian. Thank you a lot. And now we close the speaker parade with Julian Sharka. Is a dear friend. I'm very disappointed, Julian, because I love the IG News brand, and I see that you changed that last June. I don't know why. Probably AI told you to do so. I don't know. So, Julian, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Marta. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to intervene. Sorry for not being there in person. I am in Riyadh for business today. And yes, indeed, we had to change the company name because we were getting not just AI feedback, but also human feedback. The company operates in highly regulated environments. We build models for governments and big financial services like banks and asset managers. And IG News was perceived as a consumer brand. So this is why we had to switch to Domain, which reflects our mission of building domain-specific AI and enabling organizations to become AI companies, not just use AI, but own it, because this is going to be existential for them in the future. I love the title of this meeting. Our claim since we started the company in 2016 has been Make AI Human. We believe that making AI human is about prioritizing people. I've spent over 10 years in the industry, and I think we're living in a big reality distortion right now, where AI is being described as an autonomous technology that can replace people. To make an analogy, we need to simplify and we need to understand its state of the art. So for example, when we regulate AI, we're regulating it as a flying car, while it actually is a very good electrical car to the best of its possibilities today. We know it is going to be a flying car, but this is going to take time. What this tells us is that, first of all, we need to look at the state of the art before we make considerations, and there is hope for making it right. So this is not necessarily negative, saying that it is an electrical car and not a flying car. Actually, with Gen AI, which is one of the most powerful applications of AI that unlocks humans talking to machines, we are going to finally close the digital divide. We're going to enable everyone to have the chance to exploit technology equally. And I think also this is a knowledge revolution because AI makes information so easy to consume. So we're also going to accelerate human intellect, which hasn't happened since the printed press revolution more than 500 years ago. So I think, all of these use cases that are going to solve some of the world's biggest challenges across healthcare and industrial application, at the same time, can pose some risks. And the risks here are about power. So how this technology and its scalability is enabling technology monopolies that are a threat to democracy. So we often compare the AI boom to the internet bubble of the late 90s, but we are actually facing a more deeper existential threat, the intellectual property and knowledge monopoly. One where the world's intelligence is owned and distributed by tech giants, where every day we have, a model arriving from companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, or even us at Domain. The world is now feeding a beast. So, this is not even sustainable from an economic perspective. So the point that I'm trying to make is that it seems like the dream is not to serve people, but the dream is to build a digital god where there is no economic repayment but there is a reset of the economy, a re-engineering of the global economy around big platforms, data, and models. And in this new order, these big companies would not need to give the money back because they will change the way the system works itself and replace it with a market defined by dependency, exclusion, and the centralization of wealth and power in the hands of a few. This is why we believe we need to actually employ a zero trust approach, because for the first time, these models introduce a chemical integration of data and software. So to make it simple, when we put our data into a model, it's like putting sugar into a cake. Once we bake it, which is called the process of training the models, you cannot get it back. You cannot separate the data from the software. What this means, for example, for a financial services company, for a national security agency, or for a government, it means that when they're using a centralized model, they are not owning, they are exporting their intellectual property for free. So now imagine this at scale for Europe, even the US or every economy in the world. This means that we are feeding a beast. So what's the solution to that? I think, I'm positive because I think we have time, but the solution is decentralization. I think that this sounds crazy, but our only hope to save AI and to make AI human is actually regulation and policy making. We need to prioritize people, and we can achieve this only by preserving the rule of law. And I also believe that in the current geopolitical situation, we have a convenient ground for making AI safe because we need diversity. We need US that innovates fast and tries to break the borders of innovation. We need China that by not having access to the chips, they are making AI more efficient. And we need Europe that by loving the rules and having this culture of safety and trust comes first, is actually going to make AI trustworthy. So by bringing those three pieces of the puzzle together, we're going to make AI human. So I'm very positive that in the next 10 years, we're going to look back and we're going to see all of the challenges that we're discussing today as those little things that made AI safer. Because if we had no boundaries today, no friction, we would see the immediate emergency of monopolies of technology and we would lose control. Thank you very much.
Julian, I think it's a very good end, if you wish, to this conversation. Unfortunately, we are very late. If some of you really wishes to pose one single question, but if not, I will leave the floor to Angelo Maria Petroni to close our conversation. Maybe I could ask a part of our speakers if they really need to add one single point. And if not, again, I will go to Angelo. I don't know, Nick, if you are still connected, if you wish to add one point. And we have 1 point there. Please, really 1 minute.
Really a quick one.
No, I was just saying I am connected, but I think I'll hand over the word to the closing person there.
Yeah, no, Nick, please, you have 1 minute and then...
I was connected. I just said I am connected, but I don't want to take up any more time. I think we've had a chance, all of us, to say our pieces. So I'm happy for the panel to enter its closing stage.
Thank you very much for your participation then. Please.
Yes, coming back to the Professor Vincentelli winning the Nobel Prize. I find this fascinating. And maybe you remember that Alan Turing, in his famous paper of the 50s, Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence, he was saying that the machines will come closer to humans when they will start making mistakes. And I'm not saying myself errare humanum est. I mean, so despite I don't want to have this feature in my self-driving system of my car, for sure, but don't you see this as a possibility that is opening new ways or trying to understand, exploiting even these these behaviors and leading in the future, hopefully, to some emergent properties of these sophisticated and complex systems. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute, really, Alberto, and then we close.
So first of all, of course, autonomy is one of the biggest applications of AI that you can imagine, because it's also very diffused. Autonomy means that there are different systems that can act independently, possibly in collaboration with others. And so, in fact, if you look at autonomous cars, it will be fantastic to have the entire world being only on autonomous cars, because then accidents zero, almost zero. You can never say zero, but almost zero, because the uncertain environment is humans. I mean, you don't want to know what I see in Silicon Valley, like people, women with their foot on the wheel that are painting their nails, and you go by and you say, oh my God, right? So I don't think that a machine will paint its electrons while you are driving by. So this is a very important point that, you know, again, machines make obvious errors, but not
Nobel Prize, I would say. The closing remarks.
Thank you so much, everybody. I think it was a wonderful conference, extremely live with different perspectives, and I thanks in particular the guests who came, who traveled from abroad for coming here. Well, Venice is not a big sacrifice to travel to Venice in general, but anyway, it's a sacrifice to travel. So we shall convene again with these issues. We started in Venice 5 years ago, before the pandemics, with a large conference on ethics and artificial intelligence. And it seems completely different world in comparison to that time. I remember that time there was an important Italian intellectual and former minister who said, how can you believe that artificial intelligence can be done by private capitals? You need only state money for doing this. It was completely wrong. And, but this leaves, of course, the issue, what has Europe to do, if any, because we have just to choose who will kill us, China, United States, Emirates. Is there any hope for Europe in making what has been called the CERN of artificial intelligence? The idea is to build an infrastructure, physical also, not just virtual, which could replicate in the field of artificial intelligence what has been done in particle physics, where Europe has taken the lead without no doubts. I don't know, this is artificial intelligence, and I hand here amongst the many things which is posing, is redefining the issue between private and the public in the economy, not just regulation. Regulation, this is about it. This is an important argument. Is there any interest for Europe, real interest, to build something like a CERN of artificial intelligence? Of course, the Americans don't want to build it, so it's clear. The Chinese don't care, probably, but probably is our only hope. And that will be public money, by sure, but also private money, because we are not in the conditions, probably, to do it only with private, with public money. But thank you so much again. Thank you.
Also on my side, to the speakers, and also, if I may, to La Biennale. La Biennale gave an important contribution, and to Novella and Joseph, who were the real actors behind all this. Thank you.